If for whatever reason you find yourself falling through a solid object, or walking through a door and finding you can no longer go back, there is a good chance you may have entered a place filled with unexplainable locations and beings. Please take a minute to have a deep breath, stay calm, and realize you will never leave this place alive.
What would your answer be if you asked yourself what the absolute worst kind of torture a human can experience is? Perhaps something like the Iron Maiden or the Brazen Bull, but my answer would be something a lot of people might not expect, and that is finding yourself no-clipped into the absolute hell that is the Backrooms. Don't believe me? Well, today I'm going to be going into the absolute death sentence that is ending up here, all the way from the first seconds to the first weeks, if you can even get that far. Now, if you're familiar with the Backrooms whatsoever, you would know that it's basically infinite. So in order to get like an actual grip on how this would actually go, I'm going to be going over 4 different perspectives from 4 different wanderers. One starting in level 0, one in the pool rooms, one in the anomalous levels, and even a surprise bonus entrance that I'll be keeping hidden for now. Make sure to drop a comment telling me what the absolute worst level to start in would be, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. Now, picture being in the middle of a game. Your house is oddly quiet, but to be honest, you don't even notice. But after a devastating loss cuts it short, you end up wandering around your house to sort of lock back in, only for you to notice that nothing really seems right. The halls are way longer than they should be, and random items seem to be crooked or completely out of place. It's almost as if you're lost in your own house, seeing it for the first time. The windows are even worse. It's completely dark. But there's no way you were playing for that long. It was only like 4 p.m. And to make things worse, a door sits off in the corner, as if it was something that had been there your whole life. Yet it seems uncanny and wrong. But something still draws you towards it. As you approach, you begin to hear a faint hum, replacing the sound of your friends on Discord that echoed in the halls before. But thankfully, for a second, fear takes a hold and it makes you want to turn around and go back. But unfortunately, it's too late. A loud slamming noise enters your ears as reality glitches and bends around you. Everything goes dark for a moment, and when you open your eyes, you're here. God save you. Now, to sort of back up what just happened, you experience the phenomenon known as no-clipping, which happens essentially when there's a sort of tear in reality that you accidentally step into, ending up on the other side of wherever that tear is linked. And they often will end up leading you to specific areas. Think of it as a sort of bridge that you're walking over, except the other end of it is often a nightmare, and even worse, one you can't see. Most of the tears in reality in the front rooms, also known as Earth, lead to level 0, as it's technically called a lobby for a reason. But despite it being the first level, it's anything but a tutorial. Not to mention it's often inconsistent. And while often slim, that doesn't mean that there aren't rare occurrences where you end up somewhere else. And those I'll be going over soon as well, but for now let's tap back into our current, predicament. You would likely be waking up disoriented and scared, very similar to that feeling that you get when you wake up from sleeping way too long. But the area around you would be unfamiliar, with just a faint humming and a yellow glow for as far as you can see. This part is probably going to be the most difficult, but you really need to stand up and push through it, as you have at max 5 minutes before something else that ended up here realizes that it has a new target. There are a lot of entities that exist here, but the main ones for now are going to be smilers, who essentially just prefer the dark and dankest of levels, hiding in rooms, corners, and alleys, as well as skin stealers, which are just as scary as they sound, are essentially loud and pretend to be humans, only for them to get close enough to tear you in half, revealing they are actually an entity, and to make things worse, the only way to tell them apart is by the color of their blood. And I don't know about the implications of that, but fuck getting within 400 feet of this thing, not to mention close enough to see its blood. Occasionally level 0 can be devoid of life. We all know we aren't that lucky, so you should probably be assuming you're going to get rushed one of these things, or even worse, the bacteria. And that will really determine how the next few minutes play out. Now, the first few minutes of the backrooms are going to depend entirely on where you started. Level 0 is so huge and infinite that technically you could either spawn with absolutely nothing around you, or you could spawn surrounded by entities. The possibilities are technically endless. Regardless, you're going to be noticing a lack of any windows or doors, or basically anything that isn't just yellow walls and buzzing lights. And the one tip that I can give about level 0 is to never stay in level 0. Even if there are no entities in your area, this place is definitely bordering on one of the most insanity-inducing levels. Not to mention, it is heavily maze-based, causing you to get lost extremely easy. And basically, in layman's terms, this level will drive you up the wall in like 30 seconds. And the one right next to it, in my opinion, is a lot safer. Say you wake up incredibly confused and have no clue what is going on like most people. Well, lucky for you, all you would have to do to progress is to make it to something that doesn't quite look right, whether it be the first door you've seen in miles or a different colored hallway. Just make sure it's not a red one, but you might even be lucky enough to find another tear in reality that you can no-clip through. But I'm gonna be honest, those are super risky, so I'd at least listen for a second before diving through them. But what happens when that moment comes about? You know the one. Well, I'm sure I don't have to already tell you to run as fast as you can, but the good news is that depending on the entity and your fitness level, it is likely that you can outrun them, at least temporarily. So it may be fairly obvious, if you want a more higher chance of surviving in the first few minutes, you might want to pray you end up somewhere other than level 0. Well, with level 37 being skipping over the main 9 and a lot further into the backrooms, it's extremely rare to technically start here. And I'm willing to bet there are a couple people that argue it's impossible to start here. And I would partially agree, except for the fact that when you do no-clip in areas that have to do with water, for an example like pools, water parks, etc., you always are going to have a chance of ending up in the pool rooms. Well, that or level thalassophobia. Let's just hope for your sake you just end up in the pools. So what now? Well, to start, your first few minutes here, life would be a lot calmer right off the bat. Or so it seems. The pool room's a lot more desolate than level 0, apart from like odd inflatables and hallucinations, but you can and should really take your time here. Sit and comprehend what just happened and try and calm down, because despite how it looks, this level isn't all lukewarm pools and water slides. The pool rooms actually does possess one entity, but it's not one that you would expect. Rather than being physical, the hydrolitis plague tends to infest levels with water, and apart from drinking this water, of course, it also spreads from direct contact. Yes, you heard that right. There is a fucking water virus that can infect you just by getting wet. So what does this really do to you if you're infected? Like give you flu symptoms or something? Well, technically it just reproduces rapidly inside your bloodstream, putting you into shock, and then a coma, and then all your organs shut down, and then, death. So pretty mild, to be honest. But the silver lining is that, like many diseases, it doesn't appear everywhere in this level, just kind of sporadically all over the place. So the golden rule is honestly just stick to drinking almond water and not drinking pool water. But let's be real, most people would immediately end up jumping in the water that you don't have any sort of towel, and will have to continue through the back room soggy. Yeah, that's the final straw, just drown me, I'm done here. But let's just say you play it cautious and look for an exit to the next level. Now, we've talked about where level 0 would lead to, but what about the pools? Well, let's take a look into our options. Based on the documented exits, you'll either end up in level 34, aka the infinite sewers. Oh, that's a charmer. Level 4, which, while backtracking quite a bit, could link you up to the people who entered in level 0, plus it's technically safe and vibey as hell. Or level 43, which is... Why does this shit always happen to me? Okay, I think we should check back with those people later, but for now, we're going to start looking into the first few hours. And by this point, you honestly probably be on your second or third level by now. Or you die in like the first 30 seconds. And in that case, I don't really know who I'm talking to right now, but most likely if you are alive in level 0, you will have made it to level 1, aka the habitable zone, or the dingy, scary parking lot infested with smilers. But I feel like it's necessary to mention that there is a possibility we could end up in one of the levels of the Wikidot canon rather than the fandom canon. And for those who aren't familiar, the Backrooms has been majorly documented by 2 different wikis, the fandom and the Wikidot, with both technically having their strengths and weaknesses, so it's only fair I go over one of these perspectives as well. The first few hours could be relatively similar, with level 0 being just as confusing and insanity-inducing, except for this time it specifically mentions causing hallucinations that include hymns in an unrecognizable language and insect-like chittering. Still, they insist that nothing is here. Yeah, I don't know if I'm trusting that shit. Another thing is that walking will, instead of bringing you directly to level 1, which is mentioned to be strictly entered by no clipping, will bring you to the Manila rooms, essentially a sub-level of level 0, and one with different colored walls, indicating that you may just be reaching somewhere. There is also, similar to the other canon, the red rooms, which, as I mentioned earlier, appears as a red light section of level 0 that you can enter, but if you do, you will be trapped here forever, slowly losing your mind. After you do get out of level 0, the main 9 is essentially the same on both canons, so I'm just going to be going over both of them together. Once you reach level 1, which I would hope most of you have by now, you should begin looking around for the supply crates in the level, which can contain various different things, anywhere from useful things to weird things, and then occasionally very harmful things like liquid pain. It is also assumed that there is electricity here, which would cause at least half of you guys to go try to charge your phone and then attempt to call for help, only to realize that this is futile and will likely get you nowhere. I suggest that in these supply crates though, you do make sure you get something to be able to carry other items such as almond water, as it'll be one of the most important things to stock up while you're in the backrooms, as it is technically the only hope of you not losing your mind. If you've never heard of almond water, essentially a few hours into the backrooms, it's going to become apparent that no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to easily leave, and you likely will never leave. So your mind will definitely start to decay at this point. And the only way you can technically prevent this is by drinking this anomalous beverage. Lucky for you though, it's found basically everywhere. And for a reason no one understands, drinking it is able to calm you down and slow this insanity, along with providing a sort of sustenance. Failure to find and drink almond water may start to begin the wretched cycle, which is not something that you want to happen. Why? Well, going insane isn't just laughing randomly and slamming your head into walls or something. Your body basically begins to deteriorate with a sickness known as Roth syndrome, or the wretched cycle. At first you won't even notice, but then it will rapidly get worse and worse until you're killing all the humans around you and tearing your own flesh and eyes out, and essentially becoming the entity known as the Wretch, solidifying your stay in the backrooms forever. Now that you understand the risks, where were we? Alright. Level 1, hopeless calls for help, and stalking almond water. You would likely find this place extremely uncomfortable despite it being habitable, thus the name. I would assume you'd probably be trying to enter one of the cars and sleep, but most would continue exploring for hope of somewhere more visibly safe enough to rest. And I guess I can't really blame them because of the obvious appearances of random smiling faces in the corners, or dogs with decrepit human faces stalking you, but unfortunately you would have 2 more levels before you can reach some sort of guaranteed safety. Pipe dreams and the electrical station. But before we move on with the main 9, I want to check back in with how our friend in the pool rooms is doing. It seems that rather than somewhere nice like level 4 or the Infinite Aquarium, we have no clipped into level 37.1, which is a sub-level of the pool rooms labeled the Deep Zone. Being just as horrific as it sounds, as the Deep End is essentially a version of the pool rooms that is a lot more claustrophobic and a lot more dark. And despite having low entity count, it is extremely unstable and unsafe. Not to mention most rooms are completely flooded with the water that I was talking about before, except for the fact that rather it being lukewarm, it is now freezing cold. But don't worry, you're definitely going to have to swim through it to get to the next level, so have fun with that. This unfortunate characteristic of the level often causes wanderers to drown, or just end up in rooms that are pitch black where you can't see a thing. Not to mention the air in here is incredibly stale, giving you a sort of claustrophobic, suffocating feeling when you're inside. Most people that end up here will drown, not to mention, for even more fun, the hydrolysis plague still exists here. Your only chance would be to exit level 37 entirely to another level, as the other sub-levels may put you in even worse hell than you can even imagine. So let's just say you're lucky enough to be a strong swimmer, and you manage to swim through a few sections, only to realize that you now can't see. Panicking, you look around for any form of hope, feeling around for something, only to realize that you're holding an odd metal structure that you haven't seen in this level so far. You desperately follow it underground, only to begin to see a light that hopefully isn't just you drowning, only to reach the surface in an oddly familiar extensive pool complex building. But unlike the pool rooms, this one actually has windows, and structures almost appearing as if it was some sort of very unique water park once. You've now entered level 30, and you're alive. Well, for now at least. Regardless, all that swimming in hypothermia might have made you a bit hungry. Too bad you're kind of fucked and who knows where you're getting almond water. Speaking of here, what really is this place? And is it really better than 37.1? Well, no, not really. This place is assumed to be one of the origins for the hydrolytis plague, and it is said to be absolutely rampant here. Not to mention, these variants go even further to melt your skin and cause bleeding from your eyes. So I'd get the hell out of that water. One pro of this level though is that it's low-key super nostalgic and split up into 5 sections of various pools, slides, and then just fucking... So at this point, I don't know about y'all, but I'm like one pool float away from crashing out. So how does one escape to more drier levels, if you will? Oh right, you're probably tired. Okay, we'll come back in a bit. Now that we entered the section talking about a few days into the backrooms, congratulations. If you made it this far, you've done better than most. But there are some caveats to this, because now as we just saw, you're going to be extremely cold and hungry, and by now you really should be focusing on almond water as a way to sustain yourself. It is not really known whether almond water works for like food and hunger, but in this case we can just assume it works similar to, let's say, like a smoothie. Going back to our main 9 inhabitants, both Fandom and Wikidot, we can assume by now that they have made it through, or well, didn't, levels 2 and 3, ending up eventually in the temporary chill zone of the office. Some might even stay here for a while, but at a minimum, I recommend taking this time to relax, because up next, you have a lot of deadly levels, including entity-infested hotels, oceans, caves, and pitch-black complexes. But don't think about that quite yet. While you rest, you dream of an exit somewhere of a land of video game machines and neon lights. And when you wake up, you wonder, is this really real? And to be honest, But regardless, we're going to find out. The next levels are a mess of many dangers, from a squid man who specializes in breaking your mind, to the thing on level 7, which is a gigantic sea leviathan too big to even fully see. But let's say we make it through the main 9, and we get to where the 2 cannons eventually split off, level 13. Starting with the Wikidot, we have the level Boiling Frogs. Now, initially, I don't know why it's called that, because the level just looks like a 1900s apartment complex that seems to be extremely useful, as it basically just contains a bunch of apartments that seem to continuously be stocked with supplies, with the only downside being that the only entertainment here is like old books written in the 1900s or prior time period. So theoretically, you could choose to stay here if you don't mind, crippling isolation and having no access to electronics whatsoever. Now, there would be a possibility that survivors do find each other here, but that would be fairly rare. Not to mention, you've been seeing rumors about this odd phenomenon that causes people that stay too long in this level to just eventually disappear, with people saying it's almost like as if they were consumed into the level. Other than that, this level seems to be fairly nice, as long as you make sure that you don't accidentally wander too far and run into... Oh look, it's another wanderer. Wow, they seem really interested in meeting you. In fact, they're running directly at us? Yeah, on second thought, maybe we should probably start running. God, you can't have shit in this place. Now, while they are busy running for their life, what would the fandom alternative to this be? Level 13 in this canon, also known as Vitra Madness, is essentially just an unexplainably large greenhouse, surrounded on the outside by dense fog that you're unable to see through. It contains high amounts of vegetation and chairs, other various like greenhouse or garden furniture. But similar to the other level 13 we mentioned, it's fairly safe. It seems like it only appears that way, as various sources in level 13 are said to contain a lethal poison that will suddenly cause lung failure and death, along with the statement that if you look too long out the windows, it will escalate the rate on which you lose your mind at an insane rate, And because of this, I'm willing to believe that this level might not have as little entities as people might assume, and might be infested with wretches. As earlier when we talked about people going insane, if there is a factor in this level that makes you go insane quicker, it would make sense that there would be a surplus of people who have lost their mind and stay trapped here, meaning you would definitely have to keep your eyes open. So honestly, because of this and all the other stuff I mentioned, you probably shouldn't be staying here longer than like an hour or two. But that's honestly easier said than done, as there are only really 2 confirmed exits from this area, and both of them seem to be very vague and rare to find, with one of which stating it just happens. So I don't know, start running through windows or smashing plants or something like that. I mean, experiment a little bit. I mean, maybe you'll end up somewhere better. Regardless, if you are lucky enough, you're hopefully eventually going to be reaching level 14, which is ironically some sort of mental hospital. And honestly, at this point, if I saw a hospital, I would just assume that I have initially just had a stroke or something, and all of this was a sort of messed up coma that I've been in. God, if only you could be that lucky. Because after walking down the halls, it won't take long for you to realize that there is no one here. And the longer you explore, the more it freaks you out. You come into contact with various rooms, some normal and some don't really make sense. I'll leave it up to you guys. Let's see. Inpatient units, surgery suites, torture chambers, waiting rooms, storage sites. I can't quite seem to put my finger on it. Before you can figure out what's really going on, the temperature suddenly drops and smoke fills the main hall. For a split second, you see what looks like a large dark mass that spits out worms and bile that melt through the floor and writhe in various directions. Yeah, fuck that. I'll take the torture chamber, please. It begins to slough closer to you, and in a panic, you begin to mess around with various equipment in one of the rooms looking for a weapon. It has almost made it to the front of the doorway, and right before you make eye contact with it, you suddenly blink into another level. In shock of what just happened and the fact that you're somehow still alive, you realize that rather than being dead, you're now surrounded by gray cement bricks on all sides, inside of a dimly lit hallway. Understandably, you sit down to contemplate what the hell just happened and why you would be chosen of all people to come here. So I think at this point we should just leave them to their own thoughts for a bit and move on to one of our other perspectives. So to recap our 3 wanderers so far, we have one running from a skin stealer in level 15, we have one passed out cold in the depths of level 30, and then we have one freaking out currently after messing with the tools in level 16, which unfortunately is a one-way ticket to level 268. Hey, at least the hunter didn't see you, which would have been an instant death. Regardless, I think it's time to bring our 4th wanderer into this. This one I haven't mentioned thus far because unfortunately for them, they ended up no-clipping inside of the House of Mirrors at a carnival, and when they walked out, they found themselves in level fun. Kind of just in shock and denial, hiding in a corner under one of the tables. But by now it's becoming apparent that they're gonna die of dehydration, so desperately they're going to have to traverse level fun and the other anomalous levels. But what exactly is an anomalous level? And what in God's name is level fun? Well, unlike the typical Backrooms levels, the anomalous levels are essentially unnumbered kind of outside levels that most of the time you're just going to be stumbling into on accident, and going through levels normally doesn't usually lead to them. But by pure chance, if you do end up in one of these locations, they are often some of the most disturbing and dangerous, with level fun being one of the worst, with it being ground zero for the sanguine festivus virus, also known as the disease that causes wanderers to turn into partygoers, the entities that now wander these halls and rooms. If you do see a partygoer here, do not go anywhere near them. Don't listen to anything they say, as they are known to act friendly sometimes only to trick you into becoming infected and beginning the almost irreversible process that, similar to the wretched cycle, causes excessive self-mutilation, this time eating their own flesh from their body. This self-cannibalization is fueled by the excessive amount of hunger chemicals and dopamine that is produced by the pathogen in your brain, making the infected feel as if they are constantly starving to death no matter how much food they are eating. They are also reported to be extremely manic, eventually losing all control and covering their now deformed faces with tablecloth and frantically attacking any wanderers they see. With this in mind, wandering around these areas now becomes a lot more dark and horrific. Not to mention for someone to start in right off the bat. But upon the first couple minutes of wandering around, you notice a note left by what you can assume is another wanderer. A little bit messy, but it talks about another person that was lost here, slowly losing themselves to the nostalgia, and succumbing to the urge to eventually go inside one of the bouncy houses. You should assume you should probably follow their footsteps, and maybe you can find some help. The castle is odd, with you unable to see through the mesh outside, but you feel a presence around you. And eventually you find a slide in the back. Upon entering this slide, you reach a set of even more nostalgic playrooms, as if you were in a McDonald's play place. This place is massive, with ball pits that you can almost swim through, and oddly enough, doing so sometimes makes you end up in a different place. Easily lost, you still manage to find another letter that is hidden underneath part of the netting. This one seems more ominous, with the Wander reminiscing of their family and their childhood, desperately flinging themselves down more corridors in a rage trying to exit this place. Every letter that you read makes you more horrified, and to make things worse, you find a door to the next section. This time, a bunch of tables drawn across the floor. Initially creepy, but then comforting as you spot the Holy Grail. Many cans of almond water strewn across the tables. Without thinking, you gulp them down before even noticing one final letter. In horror, you almost drop it upon reading that something has essentially possessed the writer, recanting tearing their face, breaking their teeth, and gouging one of their eyes out. Before you have time to react, you turn around to notice what you can only assume to be the author of these notes, covered in a yellow cloth, dripping with blood, and making inhuman noises. Looking to your left, you see an old wooden doorway, and without thinking, you make a break for it as the creature nearly slips over fluid in a frantic effort to tear you to pieces. Upon entering through the door and forcing it shut, everything goes silent. You turn around to see the words, "The End," written on the wall. It's at this point we see all four of our wanderers in horrible predicaments, to a point where time doesn't really make sense anymore. Our pool survivor would eventually wake up to wander through level after level looking for some form of sustenance to survive, here and there discovering single cans and eventually ending up in level 798. Now if you're lucky enough to reach a level like 798, it almost is unreal how different it can be than all the other disturbing levels that you've seen so far in the backroom. And God, don't ever let me find a level like this in the backrooms, because you would have to drag me away. Especially after having to like swim through the pool rooms and run from a million different entities barely surviving. I'd just be happy spending the rest of my time in the backrooms here. And I feel like that's the issue. This level has forms of sustenance, so you could technically stay here forever, as long as you're careful not to fall to the void below, which essentially, from what I'm seeing, is an endless void that you just fall through forever, not to mention the possibility of accidentally entering another level like level 83, or worse, 76, where I'm assuming that you would freeze to death. The silver lining is that this level miraculously will eventually lead to level 399, aka one of the few levels that you can actually exit to reality through. So your chances are going to be essentially 1 in 4, which might not sound like a good chance on paper, but in the backrooms it's the best you can hope for. For example, let me look at one of our other options. After ending up in the false end, the wanderer would then look around for hours, only to find nothing but old books and distorted halls. That was until they tried the computer in the middle. After clicking on the only program, they were suddenly transported to the Asturian stairwell, which, for those unfamiliar, is a dead end, and most times it just is a never-ending staircase, leaving them really only one option left. Our third survivor, currently wandering through level 268, aka Brutally Cramped, is likely going to be where they're going to die also, as it contains not only hundreds of miles of these cramped bunker-like tunnels, but an infestation of entities, from smilers to these gigantic hostile moths, to what looks like masses of human arms and legs, to Anthetikas who essentially just corrupt your mind, forcing you to approach them, only for them to charge you and brutally beat you to death. The chances here are going to be slim to none, and you're probably noticing a pattern that no matter how many good levels or decent levels you go through, eventually you're going to run into one that is just completely unescapable, and not really meant to be survived in the first place. But if you remember, we still have one more wanderer to talk about. After running for a while, you eventually would find a door that looks different than all the others, and out of hope to block the entity behind you, you run through it, closing it behind you without thinking, only to realize you are again in another level. But this would honestly be a blessing in disguise, as I know we talked about how that level would essentially be a good place to stay, but I figured out why the level was called Boiling Frogs, because the people who resided there who fell into the trap would meet the same fate as frogs do when they are put into a slowly temperature rising pot and can't detect that the water is slowly getting hotter until they boil a lot, which would mean that disappearing rumor from earlier would likely be the norm for what happens to people who stay here too long. But would the next level even be any better? Upon looking around, you realize that you are now somehow outside. Red trees surround you and their leaves cover the floor. But that's not all that you notice. Every 100 feet or so, you see another person, lying on the floor completely unconscious, only to realize that upon checking their pulse, that this level is just strewn with corpses. On noticing this, you expect to want to run, but oddly you don't. You realize this place is a paradise and that you no longer need to leave. This phenomenon would be none other than the trap of level 14, aka Paradise. And while appearing somewhat calming, this place will immediately brainwash you to believe that it's heaven in the backrooms and never even want to try to leave, which eventually leads to you just laying down and dying. This level does seem impossible to exit, but not that many people would ever want to. Upon looking over all 4 of our survivors' fates, I really only think that out of sheer luck, the Pool Rooms Wanderer stood the most of a chance. But could he really have made it to level 399 and beat the Infinite Arcade correctly in order to create a way out? Or would he only believe that he found it only to really be slowly freezing to death in level 76? And would it have just been better to give up on trying to escape and appreciate some of the more calmer and safe levels as simply a permanent settlement? Regardless, the Backrooms to me is one of the worst fates someone can encounter, and these were just 4 examples. There could be thousands that end in worse or better ways. With that being said, I can't suggest going down a Backrooms rabbit hole on either wiki more, as it can be extremely interesting and you never really know what you're gonna get. If y'all enjoyed this video, make sure to let me know down in the comments below which of the 4 paths you enjoyed the most and would want to be on. I'm trying to get to 100k by the end of the year, so if you guys decide to help me out, thank you, it is greatly appreciated.